Okay, good afternoon and thank you for attending. I am Councillor Richard Williams, Member for Stannington Ward and Chair of this subcommittee. I'd say welcome to the meeting today. The meeting is of course open to the public. However, several items on today's agenda contain appendices which are exempt from the press and public. If members wish to discuss the information in these appendices, we will need to ask the members of the public and press to kindly leave for that part of the meeting, and we will pause the webcast. We have received one set of public questions. No petitions or statements have been received for today's meeting. At this time, could I ask everybody to put their mobile phones to silent and any other equipment that may disturb the conduct of the meeting. There is no fire test planned for today, and if there is an emergency evacuation, please take instruction from the Town Hall staff. The assembly point is Tudor Square. For the benefit of the webcast, may I now ask the individual members of the subcommittee to introduce themselves, and I would ask the officers to introduce themselves as and when they speak.
Councillor Fran Belbin, Deputy Chair of the Committee.
Councillor Christine Gilligan, spokesperson for this committee.
Councillor Curtis Crossland.
Thank you. Before we get onto the agenda, I have been asked if we can switch two of the items round in order. These are items number 8 and 9. So we'll take item 9 before item 8, if that's okay with the rest of the members. Thank you. Okay, item 1 is apologies for absence. Do we have any apologies?
I've received apologies from Councillor Mike Chaplin.
And unfortunately, I believe we don't have a substitute for him today.
No, unfortunately, Councillor Tony Downing was going to substitute, but also had to send apologies today.
Thank you. Item 2 is exclusion of the public and press, which I've already covered. Item 3 is declarations of interest. Do any members today have any wish to declare any interest in the items we will be discussing? I'll take that as a no then. The next item, item 4, is the minutes of the last meeting, which were held on the 9th of September. I'm going to go through them based on the page numbers from the main document. If you wish to make any comments or attract my attention, please do. So, page 11, page 12, page 13, page 14, page 15, and page 16. In that case, I shall take those minutes as approved. Thank you. Item 5 is public petitions, questions and statements. We have no petitions today. We do have a set of questions, and may I ask Caroline to come forward and ask her questions, please. Good afternoon, Caroline. Nice to see you again. And you're here on behalf of the Friends of Grays Park.
Yes, I'm Caroline Dewar and I'm the Chair of Friends of Grays Park. And the question that I would like to ask is regarding the restoration of the next section of the Norton Nurseries in Graves Park back to parkland by the Friends of Grays Park volunteers. Bearing in mind that Friends of Grays Park are committed to funding the restoration with no cost to the council, and that the land identified is virtually unused and should not affect the council running an unlicensed depot from the used part of the site, will the charity subcommittee please urgently agree to the land for the next section of the Chantryland Meadow and Arboretum as identified in the questions of the 22nd of January 2024 being released to Friends of Grays Park with immediate effect, for fencing off while being restored back to parkland. Then once complete, reopened to public use as first ordered by the Charity Commission in 1998, thus going some way to restoring the council's position with the Charity Commission? And can the Charity Subcommittee guarantee that plans to bring the greenhouses back into use won't adversely affect the Friends of Grace Park's long-standing request to restore the Norton Nurseries site back to parkland, and that the proposed use won't include any of the next section for the proposed arboretum, nor adversely affect the Friends of Grace Park volunteers' storage of equipment on site?
Thank you for your questions. In terms of the first of your questions, I had planned to answer that today, but I've actually decided that it needs a better answer than I can provide at the moment, so I shall write to you about that. What I would say is that I note that your use of the word urgently, and I take that on board. And so you will get a response very quickly. Regarding the second part and the greenhouses, Foodworks have been on site for several weeks now and we are not aware of any issues between their bringing the glass houses back into use in order to grow food and the Friends' access to storage. The room used by the Friends for storage was, of course, not included in the Foodworks lease. There is no reason to assume that the ongoing use of the glass houses will impact on the current or proposed access to any other part of Norton Nursery site. If you feel at any time that it is being impacted, please could you let me know? I'm sure you will. Thank you. Thank you very much. The other thing I'd just say at this point is that I know you put in a statement that you wanted to read. Unfortunately, it was late, but in dealing with the items today, we will take into account some of the issues you raised in your statement. Okay. Item 6 is members' questions, and I'm not aware there were any today. Item 7 is the work programme. This is what our plans are looking going forward, and I'd like to hand over to Rachel to take us through that.
Thank you. Rachel Appleyard, Principal Democratic Services Officer. So the committee's work programme aims to show all known substantive agenda items for forthcoming meetings. There have been a couple of changes since the last meeting. These are highlighted on page 22 of the report pack. 3 of these items are due at the committee today, and then another is due at the committee meeting in January. And then from page 23 onwards, you can see in Appendix 1 the upcoming meetings of this committee and the items that are set out for those meetings. Thank you.
Do members have any questions about our work programme? No? Okay, thank you very much. That is noted. As mentioned earlier, we're now going into the formal decisions section of this meeting, and we're going to move straight to item 9, which is a report on Norton Nursery's alternative options for storing operational plant and equipment. And is this you, Ruth? Thank you.
Hi, yes, I'm Ruth Bell, I'm Head of Parks and Countryside. So this item is the update on potential alternatives to the use of Norton Nurseries as an operational base for Parks and Countryside services. I'm going to go through some bits and formally read what's in the paper, and then I'm going to try and summarise if that's okay. I'm not proposing to go through it all line by line, but I am proposing to cover the key matters. So this report updates the Charity Trustee Subcommittee on the progress made in identifying suitable alternatives to replace Norton Nurseries as an operational base to support the management and maintenance of local green spaces, including the Graves Park Charity. And within this report, the Charity Trustee Subcommittee is recommended to note the contents of the report and support the continued work to identify further options to be brought back to a future committee for consideration. So members will remember that at the Charity Trustee Subcommittee on the 16th of July of this year, the committee asked us to go away and explore any feasible sites that might be used as an operational base to replace Norton Nurseries in order that the charitable land can be restored to parkland, and this report is going through an update on that matter. The operational base currently located at Norton Nurseries supports the management and maintenance of a number of green spaces in the local area, including parks, some of Sheffield City Council social housing public realm, and also the Graves Park Charitable site. The Council has for several years been engaged in correspondence with the Charity Commission regarding several matters around the Graves Park charity, and the correspondence was in part regarding the section of the Graves Park charity known as Norton Nurseries. The Charity Commission has asked for confirmation of how and for what purpose the Council is using the nurseries, and the Charity Commission have also advised that because the Trustee and the Council have not yet regularised any arrangements for the use of Norton Nurseries, that's in terms of setting up an agreement between the Council and the Trustees for the use of the Park's charitable land, the Trustee has in effect been acting in breach of the Graves Park Charity 2009 scheme and also the Charities Act 2011. So, notwithstanding the need to regularise the arrangement, it's important to say that in practical terms, it's worked satisfactorily for both the Graves Park Charity and the Council to use Norton Nursery as an operational base. The charity does not own any plant or equipment of its own for the maintenance and upkeep of the park, and the provision of the space by the charity to store council equipment is compensated for by the charity not having to invest in its own equipment. There are several requirements of the operational base which are set out in the report. I won't read them out. It's a very long list, including storage of very large vehicles, welfare facilities and, for example, diesel storage. The work that we've undertaken so far to review the options has considered a number of areas to date. Firstly, we've looked at the Council's existing depot estate. So most people will be aware that the Council operates a small number of depots across the city. The estate is not significant and people don't often realise that. It's heavily used and it's currently subject to a review that will result in consolidation and a reduction in the size of that estate. Parks and Countryside do currently operate out of a number of those depots. The requirements for the entire Norton Nurseries operational base are significant, as set out in the report, and there is not enough capacity within any one depot to house the base in its entirety. Because of that, we have also looked at whether or not we can split the Norton Nurseries operational base into a number of smaller facilities, and we've considered that throughout. Secondly, we've looked at larger sites that would be suitable to house the entire operational base, or at least a large proportion of it. And in Appendix A of this report, there is a list of all the sites that have been looked at. All of the options were looked at based on feasibility of space and also its proximity to Graves Park and the surrounding areas. And unfortunately, none of the sites that were identified were suitable, which was a real shame. The reasons for discounting those various sites included, for example, a lot of those sites had already been mentioned in the Council's draft local plan as potential housing sites, which took them off the table. And also there were a couple of sites that were actually already leased out on long-term leases to either external partners or people outside the Council. Thirdly, we looked at whether there were any alternate areas available within Graves Park for the operational base to be moved to somewhere else within the site. But ultimately, in order to do that, land that is currently being used in some way as part of the park, either as an active green space, car parking, or a building that's used in some way by the community, would have to be fenced and separated from the rest of the park in order for us to be able to use it as an operational base. Therefore, there wouldn't be able to be any public access. So that didn't feel to be appropriate, didn't feel like that would be in the best interests of the charity. We therefore discounted that option. Fourthly, we have been exploring whether or not any of our strategic partners have facilities that we could share. And there's a mention of that in the appendix of the report. And there are some options that are actually feasible, and we're continuing to explore that. So that is something that we'll bring back to a future meeting. Strategic partners, sorry, yes. Strategic partners, for anybody that's not aware, includes, for example, AME, Veolia, those partners that we have very large contracts where they work across the city on our behalf. Fifthly, private land. We looked at whether or not there were any suitable sites that could be leased or purchased by either the Graves Park charity or the council as an alternative operational base. At the time that we looked, there wasn't anywhere suitable in an appropriate location. There were a number of sites, for example, out by Meadow Hall, but that is simply too far to travel. It would take so much time that the Graves Park charity and other sites would suffer significantly as a result of that. I think it's important to say that obviously whenever you look at something like that, it's a point in time, so we are going to continue to explore that because you never know, something absolutely perfect, could come on the market next week. And then finally, the other thing that we are looking at is the actual Norton Nurseries operational base, and whether or not there is a different and smaller configuration of the base that would allow us to propose that some of the facilities remain within Norton Nurseries, but actually some of the site could be returned, for example, as Caroline highlighted, that the third section of the Arboretum for restoration. We are currently looking at what those different configurations might be, what the requirements outside of the site would be in order to move bits out, and we will report back to this committee when we have those answers. So on the basis that we continue to explore these options and come back with one or several options for this committee to decide what it wants to do, we would ask that the Charity Trustee Subcommittee note the contents of the report and then support the continued work to identify further options to be brought back to this committee at a later date for consideration.
Thank you. Do I have any questions from members? Fran.
Thank you. Can I say firstly, thanks for all the work that's gone into doing this. I do appreciate that we asked you for this report back in July, and I can see that there's a lot gone into it, and I also appreciate it's quite difficult at a time when we've already been around the city allocating land for housing and for employment land and all those things, which, as I can see, has taken out some of your options around this. So there are a few kind of questions and points I wanted to make around it, and some of which might be actually relevant to item 8 rather than item 9, but I think there's a bit of crossover, so apologies if I stray into some of that. Looking at the options that you've put out on the table in this report, some to me seem a lot more realistic than others, and it's just trying to get an understanding of what costs are in relation to some of them as well. Obviously, going out and purchasing a new piece of land is going to cost a considerable amount. If we went for an option with one of the partners, as you described, Amy and Veolia, and I think Olive Grove is mentioned within the report, presumably there would be a cost around that as well, and those costs would come back to both the council and to the charity, or some combination of the two. So it's just being clear what the outcomes of this is. The way I understand it at the moment, given the item 8 and the licence, we will be looking at putting some funding into the charity in recompense for the space that is being used by the council as opposed to just exclusively by Graves Park. So there's some additional income there, but obviously if we move it out, then there's just additional charges to both of us. I know one of the questions that the Friends group had raised as well was around that 60-40% split in terms of how much is used of the current base by Graves Park and how much is used by other parts of Sheffield City Council, and it'd be good to understand a little bit, that's possibly on the other item, but it'd be good to understand that a little bit better, because that starts to give a bit of an indication of how much the cost would be to each party, if you like, if we did come to move out. It does feel to me as if a strong preference would be the last one that you mentioned, at least in the short term, around trying to reconfigure the existing space so we can meet the needs of the Friends group, who, as we know, have done some fantastic work already in the adjacent part of the park, and if it is possible to reduce the amount of space that we need in the immediate future, or if we can resite a part of the base in a way that isn't incurring too much extra expenditure, that feels to me like it would be the ideal solution to this. So I'm very much in favour of continuing the work and the recommendation within it. So again, it'd be good to understand just a little bit more about how realistic that is, and specifically the stuff around configuration. I think you're quite clear where the Friends want to use, so it'd be good to understand that a little bit more as well. I think that's it for now. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think it's worth flagging that a number of those questions were related to the next item, so you might want to raise them then, because I think it'll probably blur the lines if that's okay. That's the next one. Sorry. No. I think you're right that some are likely to be more feasible than others, because there's not a way of doing this that doesn't have some change in monetary terms. The item that we're going to discuss next proposes a modest rent going to the charity, and all other options are likely to have a cost in some way applied to them. I think it's important to say we simply don't know what that will be. I think you're right that purchasing or leasing a new piece of land is likely to be expensive when you consider the size, the scale of the Norton Nursery's operational base. The next item talks about that land having been valued, so we know what the proposed rental is to the charity there. So even if we use that as a baseline figure, it's quite a bit of money. I think the split is something that we should address in the next one. But I think one of the reasons that this report is an update report rather than a proposal for options is simply because we don't have all of those answers yet. We've gone through a number of sites, unfortunately had to discount quite a few, some of which we would have really been keen on, and we're now honing in on sort of 2 or 3 options, which when we come back to this committee for a decision, they will be fully costed so that the decision can be made with all the information available, not with a proposal for us to go away and do a bit of further work. It will be, these are the options, these are the costs or benefits of any of these options, and it will hopefully allow you to take a really informed decision on that basis. The point about reconfiguration, I think, is a really good one. That feels very feasible. I don't know what it will look like, but we do know that the site that the Friends are interested in, I think it's very frustrating to the Friends because it looks like an area that's not well used. It doesn't have any of our containers on it for welfare facilities or for storage, and we don't generally store our vehicles in that area all of the time. It's actually used as an area to allow the safe manoeuvring of our very large vehicles within the site. So the thing that we're exploring is if we were able to move those vehicles out of Norton Nursery so that they didn't attend that site at all, and we could house them somewhere else where they could safely be manoeuvred with the space that they need in and amongst any other operations that we have at another site. If we were able to do that, it might be a possibility that we can continue to use a chunk of the site, and I don't know exactly what that would look like, but we would then also be able to facilitate the return of that area to parkland for the Friends of Grace Park. So that is something that we're actively exploring at the moment and working out what is the minimum you would need to take away to allow that to happen, and then are there any knock-ons if you take that away? Does that mean you actually also need to take that away, for example? Does that make sense?
Thank you, Ruth. Curtis.
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to see progress being made on this. I know it's been going on for quite a while. And to be fair, I think I'm quite sympathetic to the aims of Friends of Grace Park. In fact, one of my first political experiences in Sheffield was campaigning with Steve against the sale of Cobner Cottage back when my hairline wasn't receding quite as much as it is now. So it is my personal view that we do just need to find an alternative. So I'm really pleased to see work continuing on this. I think there is an interesting point here about the governance structure within the city, because there will be a knock-on effect to other parks within the city. And so I know we've spoken previously about having a briefing at Communities, Parks and Leisure about that. I think that would be good to take forward. Specifically about this, have we looked at land in Derbyshire or anything? Because obviously Norton is right on the border of the city, so it'd be interesting to kind of broaden our horizons a bit.
I don't know the answer to that question, but I suspect the answer is no. I suspect we looked within the Sheffield boundary, but I'll speak to Property Services because, like I say, on the looking at alternate land and sites, that's work that's going to continue up until the point that information is brought back to this committee. So I'll ask Property to consider, very close locations as part of their search.
Any other person? Okay. Well, firstly, thank you for your report. There's a lot of work that's gone into that. It is progress, and it's a lot of progress actually. I'm very keen to get this resolved, but done properly, I think is a key thing. Let's just do this once and do it properly, and we can then move on, and hopefully the friends can move on as well. It's been a long process if you could take it right the way back to the start, but in a way, let's consider it, this has started in July, and now we're moving forward. So thank you very much. We have 2 more meetings of this committee this cycle, in January and in March, and hopefully we'll be in a much better position by then. Thank you very much. So the recommendation is to note the contents of this report and support the continued work to identify further options which will be brought back to this committee for consideration. Is that agreed? That's unanimous. Thank you. We now go back to item 8, which I shall find in a minute. This covers a licence for use of Norton nurseries as an operational base for parks and countryside. Is this again yourself? Thank you.
It is me again. It's important to say that there are 2 closed appendices associated with this report. They are the 2 valuation reports, but the licence that we're talking about, that is in an open appendix, so I am hopeful that we won't need to go into any kind of closed session here. So the report outlines a proposal to grant a licence to Sheffield City Council for its Parks and Countryside Service to continue using part of the Norton Nurseries area of Graves Park as an operational base for the management and maintenance of green spaces outside of Graves Park. This use is in addition to and ancillary to the use of the same piece of land for the management and maintenance of Graves Park, which is permitted by the Charities scheme. And the report seeks approval from the council acting as sole trustee of the Graves Park charity to agree to a 12-month licence of the area to allow the council's ancillary use. And I'll just read out the recommendations in their entirety, if that's okay. The Charity Trustee Subcommittee is recommended to note the contents of this report and annexes, approve the terms of the licence proposal to regularise the ancillary arrangement in Graves Park, and confirm that the necessary processes in relation to transactions with connected persons have been complied with, and that subject to the Charity Commission consent, confirming the licence can be entered into with the council, which is a bit wordy, but it'll be explained a little bit later. I'm not proposing to go through the report line by line, but I do have quite a bit to say in highlighting the key points, if that's okay. So we discussed this a little bit in the previous item, but the council has for several years been engaged in correspondence with the Charity Commission regarding several matters concerning the Graves Park charity, including the provision of an operational base for the maintenance of the park itself, which of course is permitted, and also the ancillary use of that base as an operational base for the maintenance of other green sites outside of the Graves Park charity. Over the years, the Charity Commission has inquired about how the council is using the land at Norton Nurseries and what steps have been taken to regularise those arrangements. And the Charity Commission advised that because the council has not regularised those arrangements, the trustee has been acting in breach of the trust and that the current position cannot continue. So, linked to the report that we just talked about, whilst work is undertaken to fully understand the requirements of an operational base or multiple bases in order to continue to deliver green space management and maintenance, we're proposing that as an interim measure, a licence is granted to Sheffield City Council for a period of 12 months to continue the ancillary use at Graves Park. The licence would require Sheffield City Council to pay a rental fee to the Graves Park charity for the use of Norton Nurseries for the support of sites other than Graves Park, and then in turn the council would be able to recharge the charity for the use of the council's staff and equipment to deliver the necessary maintenance to Graves Park. The mechanism for the licence fee and the recharging are set out in the draft licence. And at this point, I just wanted to touch on the point that the Friends of Graves Park raised around that 60-40 split, and say that actually one of the things that we'd be happy to go away and do is explore the different charging mechanisms, on what basis you might charge, and actually what those percentages look like as of now, if that would be helpful. So that everybody can understand on what basis things are being recharged and how the site is used, and then also as part of the report coming back how it might be used going forward by both sides, the charity and the non-charitable use. It's important to say that as the council is the sole trustee of the charity, it is for the purposes of the Charities Act 2011 deemed to be a connected person. Because of this, and to ensure that there is no conflict of interest, the charity and the council have been separately represented in respect of the negotiation of the terms of the licence, including the valuation of what would be a fair licence fee. In the case of the charity, it was considered prudent that it should be represented by an independent third party, and after a tender process was undertaken, Fowler Sandford were appointed to act on behalf of the charity. The council was represented by council officers who are experienced at providing valuations, and the valuations for each party are attached in the closed appendices A and B. And a rental fee, together with the terms and conditions of the licence, that both sets of professional officers considered to be fair, has, subject to the approval of this committee, been agreed. Entering into a licence and entering into this licence agreement would regularise the commercial relationship between the charity and the council, and by doing that it would end that breach of trust and provide the charity with a source of income. And I just wanted to highlight the benefits to the charity that we anticipate being provided by the approval of this licence. In order to deliver the objects of the charity, it's necessary to maintain and manage the green space. That requires the use of plant, equipment and staff, and that are things that the charity does not have on its own, and it doesn't have the resources to acquire. An operational base is needed to securely house plant and equipment and provide welfare facilities, and the site provides that. And to date, the shared use has worked satisfactorily for both the charity and the council. The location of the operational base being part of the Graves Park site ensures that any potential impact of travel from one location to another and any additional costs of a separate site are not being felt by the Graves Park charity at this stage. And also the payment of that fee from Sheffield City Council to the charity for the use of Norton nurseries provides an income stream for that 12-month period that would not be subject to any of the other funding issues that we do experience within the council or within parks and countryside budgets, such as the reductions. So on that basis, I'll just read the recommendations out again if that's okay. The Charity Trustee Subcommittee is recommended to note the contents of the report and annexes, approve the terms of the licence proposal to regularise the ancillary arrangement in Graves Park, and confirm that the necessary processes in relation to transactions with connected persons have been complied with, and that subject to the Charity Commission consent, confirming the licence can be entered into with the council. And it's worth me adding in that if this committee approves the licence as it's set out in this report, it would then go to the Charity Commission for approval.
Thank you very much. Any questions from the members? Fran.
Thank you. Thank you for picking up the issue about the 60-40%. And I think, yes, it'd be really useful if we could explore that a bit further and just give some further clarification around that. Just to hop back to the statement that I know the Friends weren't able to give, but I know there was some anxiety expressed about this licence, basically. I think my feeling is it's a 12-month licence. It is very much an interim measure. I appreciate that we have to regularise the situation that we have, that we've been told by the Charity Commission that we must do that. And it feels to me that this is an appropriate way to do that. And I don't think we should view it very much, and I'm sure this will be recorded here in minutes and so on, that this is very much not a thin end of the wedge type issue. This is very much about holding that interim position while we do all the work that we referred to in the previous item. One of the things I wanted to ask about whether there's any retrospective application of this licence, because as we've said, there has been a number of years where effectively we've been operating without any official agreement in place. So does anything happen that applies retrospectively? And a broader question is just around having a clearer understanding of to what extent the council is funding each individual park and to what extent the charity is funding them, because it does feel to me, not only in Graves Park but in a number of our charitable parks, it isn't really clear to what extent both parties are funding, and I think it would be a lot clearer and easier if there was a wider understanding of that by the public as well as us as members of the committee and members of the council. I appreciate, you know, it's probably quite a huge budget that you have for parks in total, and understanding how that applies around individual parks might be helpful for the future. And I have one other question that I've now forgot. Oh, that relates to the next item, I think, actually. Don't worry. Thank you.
Thank you, Fran. Any other questions? Curtis.
Thank you, Chair. I've just totally gone out of my head now. You put me on the spot, sorry. So, playing devil's advocate a little bit, if we were, for example, just going to say, no, don't want to do it, let's kick the council off, what would the impact be on the maintenance of the park? Is one question. And secondly, in 12 months' time, will this then, if something goes wrong with finding an alternative, will this then have to come back here as well?
Do you mind if I answer those in reverse order? Just because actually Curtis's are now in my head. Playing devil's advocate, if you say, no, you don't want to do it, we would have to get off immediately, because the Charity Commission have been really clear we can't continue as we are. So we would have to find alternate arrangements. But, sorry, and then that would be for the entire base. So that would be for all of those park sites, the housing sites that we service and the Graves Park charity. So what would the impact be? We don't have a large budget in parks. We would have to pay to be somewhere else, and we'd have to pay to be somewhere else at short notice. That might not be an ideal location. So the impact would likely be felt absolutely everywhere. We would have to spend money that we would otherwise spend on maintaining the parks, on renting somewhere, on arranging security at short notice and moving a very large operational base somewhere else. So the Graves Park charity would absolutely suffer. It would suffer in multiple ways. So immediately, the operational base would not be located as close to Graves Park. They would feel that impact straight away. The money that the council has to spend on all of its sites would be reduced probably quite dramatically, which will be felt by all sites, including the Graves Park charity. So whilst I don't have figures for you, I want to be very clear there would be an impact, and it would be a noticeable impact on our ability to service multiple sites, but for the purposes of this report and your conversation, it would impact on our ability to service Graves Park in the way that we do currently.
Can I just add to that?
Sure.
Just to add a point, just to be really clear, whilst the evaluations have been done across a 60-40 split in terms of how much kind of square meterage and time is spent servicing Graves Park and non-charitable green spaces, what is very difficult to do is disaggregate the actual resources. So your machinery, tools, equipment and employees can't be split 60-40 as such. So that would mean that the whole of the operation would need to come out of Norton Nurseries and go, for instance, if it went to the site at Meadowhall, which is a suitable site but too far away, that would then have a cost implication and a time and resource implication. So it's very difficult to actually disaggregate Graves Park resources, human and tangible, and machinery as well. So that's why it's so difficult to kind of move part of the operation away. So if the decision was no to the licence, it would have to be the whole of the Parks and Countryside operation that was immediately moved while a resolution could be found.
And then on your final point, if we didn't have a solution to the first paper that we discussed, within 12 months, would it have to come back? Yes, this is a licence for 12 months.
Yeah.
So if there was any reason for us to need to extend that, it would have to be agreed here. And it would have to be done in advance for the reasons that we just discussed, because actually we can't uplift an entire base in a week. So we would need enough notice. But obviously the plan is to come back within the next couple of committees with options for a decision to be made rather than us have a rolling 12-month licence. That's not what we're looking for here. We said 12 months rather than 24 months for that very purpose. Yeah. Fran, sorry, if I don't have all of the answers, will you tell me if I've missed anything out? Because I tried to note them down. Is it an interim measure? Yes, it absolutely is. There is no retrospective charge being proposed as part of this. Obviously, the council's budgets work on an annual basis. So as of 31st of March 2024, our budget for the year before had been spent. So we're not proposing any backdating of any charge. Your question about funding for each park is a really interesting one. Obviously, annually, reports are brought on the finances of each charity, but they're done by finance, and we don't really consider them as part of each report. And maybe there's a piece of work to do to talk almost beyond finance terms about each of those sites so that we can understand it a little bit more, because I think they each come and they're very financy, but they do include information about how much the council is putting into each charity, how much is held by each charity and how much is earned by each charity. So it might be that we want to have perhaps a bigger session where we talk about that a little bit more broadly and really seek to understand how each site works and has worked over recent years.
Yeah. If I can just add a little bit more, it tends to be that the majority of the income to each of the charitable parks is from the council's revenue budget. There are some reserved contributions to some parks where there have been donations, for instance, that have been reserved for reserved funds, as it's called, and these are set out in the annual accounts. But I think it's safe to say that the majority of the income going into most of the parks is from the council's revenue fund. As Ruth said, they are set out in an annual set of accounts that are audited for each of the charities, and maybe there is more that we can do to maybe bring them here and have some of that discussion in due course each year. And I think there's a point to actually make about the contribution to the licence fee of Graves Park charity, and how that will affect the revenue budget. Yeah.
Yes.
I think it will be reduced accordingly. Yeah. Sorry, I wasn't trying to put you on the spot there.
So the arrangement with regard to this particular licence, where the £60,000 is to be paid to the Graves Park charity, it is important to say that Sheffield Parks and Countryside hasn't been given an additional £60,000. So this will reduce the amount that the council gives at the end of the year to the charity by way of its grant annually. The one thing that it does is hypothetically, if in April our budgets are reduced significantly, this amount would not reduce. This would have to stay the same. But the Graves Park charity won't feel a £60,000 increase in the amount of money being spent in the park, simply because we as council officers are responsible for looking after the whole green spaces estate across the city, and we have to keep doing that.
Thanks. I think I understand that. I suppose what I'm trying to get at, and perhaps it is, I think it's the next meeting where we look at the accounts, isn't it? Is it in January? Is whether there is in-kind contributions from Sheffield City Council to the charitable parks that wouldn't show up in the accounts, for example.
There shouldn't be.
No.
So the accounts are as accurate as they can be in terms of the amount of allocation of the revenue grant towards resources and transport and machinery. I'm not going to say it's an exact science, because as we've just described with Graves Park, the resources are split, but the accounts are as accurate a reflection as they can be of the amount of revenue funding that's given to the charities.
Any other questions from members? No? Okay, could I just say again that I'm reassured by this in that it is a 12-month temporary licence. I don't see it as a thin end of the wedge, as Fran mentioned. I think it's good that we've had independent valuations, so there's a degree of transparency there. I also think your suggestion of looking at the split and providing some more details would be I think everybody would find that very useful. And just generally, I think this is the right thing to do at this stage. I cannot believe that it is in the interest of the charity or to force the council to move out virtually overnight. I see no benefit of it, and I think this is a good compromise. But it is working separately from. This has got in effect nothing to do with the previous item. That's a separate standalone project. Okay. On that basis, if nobody has any other points, the recommendations, I will read them again. The Charity Trustee SubCommittee is recommended to, 1, note the content of this report and annexures, difficult, I know, shocking word, approve the terms of licence proposed to regularise the ancillary arrangements in Graves Park, confirm that the necessary processes in relation to transactions with connected persons has been complied with, and that subject to the Charity Commission's consent, confirming the licence can be entered into with the council.
And I just wanted to confirm that we would, subject to approval, we will send the licence to the Charity Commission following this meeting.
Thank you. Are we all in agreement? No, silence reigns, so that's been accepted. Thank you very much. Item 10, which is the next item on the agenda, is an update on charitable site operations in parks and countryside. Is that Ruth again? Thank you.
Thank you. So this report updates the Charity Trustee SubCommittee on the charitable green spaces in Sheffield and how the operational functions are carried out for each site. I'll read the recommendations out in full. The Charity Trustee SubCommittee is recommended to note the contents of the report and then support the continued work to further review operations in support of the maintenance of charitable green spaces across Sheffield. And I'd planned to say I'm not proposing to go through the report line by line and just highlight the key points, but when I actually started noting that down, it's actually the entire report, so I'm going to go through it almost in its entirety, but it's not a long report, so I hope that's all right. So the ongoing dialogue between the Trustee and the Charity Commission that we've spoken about in the previous 2 items regarding the need to put in place formal arrangements at Norton Nurseries has prompted us to begin to review arrangements at other charitable green spaces across the city. There are 17 registered charitable sites in Sheffield. I won't read them out, but they are contained in the report. For the purposes of this report, we're not looking at Graves Park because obviously that has been subject to separate reports. To ensure that the arrangements in each charitable site are correct and all in the best interest of each individual charity, we've started to review how the management of each site is undertaken. There are a number of factors that we're considering at this stage, including, for example, whether there is an operational base at the site, where vehicles and machinery are housed, where welfare facilities are located, and whether the operational team that manage the site also manage other sites. And I wanted to point out here that in the vast majority of cases, the answer to that question will be yes, because actually there are very few sites in Sheffield that have a team that don't manage multiple sites. There are currently no formal arrangements in place whereby Sheffield City Council pays a rent or licence fee to a charitable site for the use of an operational area within a green space, or where a charity pays Sheffield City Council for the use of another site as an operational area, with the exception, obviously, as of now, of Graves Park, where we've literally just agreed that licence. Details of all the sites and how each site is managed are contained in Appendix A, but just to go through them very briefly. We have 4 charitable sites that are effectively self-contained. They have an operational base located within the site, and on those sites, equipment, plant and staff welfare are delivered from the site or largely from the site. There are always small elements that are delivered elsewhere, for example, where waste is stored. And tractors are often not located in multiple sites. They're all housed together. Those 4 charitable sites are Firth Park, High Hazels, Hillsborough Park and also Norfolk Park. All of those sites have got teams based there who support multiple sites, the majority of which are not charitable. So each of those sites has got a team and vehicles and plant located there which are used on multiple sites, the majority of which are not charitable. We've not yet begun work on proportions, staffing allocations or any land valuations. There are 2 charitable sites that are serviced in part from within the site. So that means that there are some facilities provided on the site. That's often staff welfare and equipment storage, with the larger elements such as vehicle storage being housed elsewhere. Those sites are Weston and Endcliffe. Again, on those 2 sites, the teams based there and the plant that is used all service multiple sites, the majority of which are probably not charitable. And again, we haven't begun any of the work on allocations, land values or proportions of time or use of equipment. And then there are a number of charitable sites that are serviced entirely from another site, so they don't have any kind of operational base within the green space itself. Everything is done from another site. Those sites are Charnock Green, Chelsea Park, Earl Marshall Rec, Glenhow Park, Phillimore Park, Richmond Park, Ripon Street, Sutherland Road and Winkerbank. And again, we haven't done the work looking at how much of the time of those teams and how much of the use of their equipment is spent on the charitable site, but we are clear that none of it is done from within the charitable site itself. And then I think it's worth saying that there is 1 site, Blackamoor, that we are not proposing to look at within this work, and that is because the site in its entirety is leased to the Sheffield and Rotherham Wildlife Trust, who manage it on our behalf. Our proposal is that on a site-by-site basis, the arrangements for each site will be reviewed. That would include gathering information about proportions of time spent on each site, what other sites are managed, any land valuations that might be needed in order to come up with rental fees, and then once we've done that work, any decisions about potential licenses or formal arrangements would be brought back here to the Charity Trustee subcommittee. I think it's important to say that we're at the very, very beginning stage of this. We've literally just looked at the sites and what the arrangements are. We haven't started any of the other work as yet. But to go back to the recommendations, the Charity Trustee Subcommittee is recommended to note the contents of the report and then support the continued work to further review operations in support of the maintenance of charitable green spaces across Sheffield.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll ask members if they've got questions shortly, but I have one, which I'll start with. Have you in your mind got an end date for this particular piece of work?
Quick answer, no. No, I think there are a few things. So I think it's important to conclude the Norton Nurseries work first, because I think that is the most important, and it's also the one that we've genuinely made a lot of progress on. I also think that there is a bigger conversation needed about charitable sites, how we maintain them and what that might look like. And I think there will likely be some decisions going to governance committee as we start looking at that. So I don't think we should rush into it. I don't think we should ignore it. We've started looking at it now, and it's important that we have it in our mind. But I don't think it would be wise for us to say, let's come back at the next meeting and try and conclude all of this, because I think this is likely to end up being part of a bigger piece of work as we consider all of our charitable sites.
I mean, certainly keep it moving, because there's more work to do. But because of the differences that Ruth described, you've essentially got 3 different arrangements depending on the park. You've got some that are completely serviced by the council from elsewhere, some that service themselves and somewhere else, and some of a combination of that. So it's not, I don't want to say that Norton Nurseries and Graves Park is straightforward in any way, but it kind of is, because it is contained in that site. So I think we'll keep it moving at pace, and bring it back to you as committee as we progress the work and seek direction from you, an agreement to the work that we're doing, if that is okay.
Do members have questions? Fran?
Not so much a question as a comment, but I think, this whole piece of work around all 3 items actually just demonstrate how difficult it is to separate off some of the charitable parks work alongside the council work, and that for us as a committee, and we cannot get away from the fact that the council is the trustee for those parks as well. But, you know, you can see the potential for ourselves as members of the charity subcommittee and potential conflicts, all those kinds of issues. And that's why I totally agree that we should be looking at this through the governance committee as well, and looking at ways that we will never be able to disentangle all these things because they are inevitably tangled, but we can be as clear and transparent as possible around them, which probably doesn't feel as if it is clear and transparent at the moment if you're outside looking in on this. It doesn't when you're inside looking out at it either, frankly. But I think there's ways that we can improve it. You know, not all the parks that we're talking about will have friends groups who will be challenging us around this, so we need to make sure that we're working on behalf of all those charitable parks and not just those with friends groups who are very, very active and so on. So I really agree about the piece of work, and as the chair of the governance committee, I'm more than happy to commit to doing that alongside. It'd be great to work alongside colleagues here and on governance and yourselves to do that. So thank you. Again, accept the recommendations of the report, but I think, yeah, we do have to just recognise the complexities around this. Thank you.
Any other members' questions? No. Okay, in that case, I'll go to the recommendation. The Charity Trustee Subcommittee is recommended to, 1, note the contents of this report, and secondly, support the continued work to further review operations in support of the maintenance of charitable green spaces in Sheffield. Is that agreed? Okay, thank you. And thank you for your report. Item 11 refers to the lease of the cricket pavilion in Graves Park. Is Catherine here? Oh, there you are. Brilliant. Would you like to introduce yourself for the benefit of the webcast?
Yeah, I'm Catherine McDougall, Graves Park Manager. Please bear with me, this is my first time presenting a report, so if I get it wrong, let me know. So I'm bringing a report for a proposal to grant a lease of the cricket pavilion and licence of the cricket playing area at Charles Ashmore, Graves Park to Alma Iqbal Cricket Club. The recommendations are to note the contents of this report and approve the lease and licence proposals based on the terms set out in closed Appendix 2. And that appendix is just closed because it contains commercial details about the licence and lease. So I'm not going to run through everything, I'll just go through a bit of background and why we've come to this proposal. So we're requesting this proposal to allow a club to regularly play in Graves Park. This meets the charitable objectives of the park by providing recreational facilities to improve the conditions of life of the people of Sheffield. The background to why this has arisen is that we did have a club that was using the facilities for a number of years. They moved out at the end of the 2022-3 season, and we selected Alma Iqbal because they don't have a home ground, so they were having to travel for every match. They didn't have anywhere to store their equipment, and they came to us and requested a space to be. They're a very large club. They initially played under licence just to use the facility, but it meant that they couldn't obtain any funding, they couldn't improve the facilities, so they have requested the long-term security of a lease, which allows them to go to funders like the English Cricket Board and get some funding to improve the facilities, which the Graves Park charity currently doesn't have the funding to improve themselves. We did consider alternatives like just continuing on a licence agreement, but Alma Iqbal wouldn't be able to obtain funding this way from external bodies like the English Cricket Board, National Lottery. So basically they would say that they couldn't stay there long term. And it also means that the facilities would be in a state where they'd just be getting worse and worse. You know, we might, as a council and as a charity, be able to make sort of minor repairs, but we're not going to be able to sort of wholesale rejuvenate them, and they look quite scruffy and they're not a great facility in the park that we want to offer. We did also look at a lease of the pavilion and pitch, the playing area, and after a bit of consultation with local stakeholders, the Friends of Graves Park established that a lease over such a large area was sort of less agreeable than having a split licence over the playing pitch, which means that when it's not in use for cricket games and being cut, essentially, that the public can still use it. It's not exclusively used by the club, it's still part of the park, and it would just be that pavilion facility that has the lease. We had a meeting on the 17th of September 2024 with funding bodies, the Friends of Graves Park, the cricket club, and representatives from the council, including parks, sports and property, to essentially establish that was an agreeable solution to all parties. So essentially that's how we came about a split sort of lease and licence proposal to minimise the area of the park leased, but still allow the club to obtain funding and invest in it long term. It's important to say that although there will be a lease on the pavilion, at the end of the tenancy, these will remain under the ownership of the charity under sections 24 to 28 of the Landlord and Tenant Act of 1954. So there will be no risk to the charity that the club will maintain those facilities or that the facilities will not remain under the charity's control. And that's it.
Thank you very much for your comprehensive report. Christine.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report. I'm just going to play devil's advocate now. Just, the lease is saying that the lessee, is that how you pronounce it? Lessee, yeah, I don't think I've ever said that word before. The lessee will be responsible for all repairs. What happens if they don't do them?
So essentially that's written in the lease that they would be responsible, and if they're not responsible, we could essentially legally make them responsible for it. So the charity would have control to say, look, you've not done what you've done. Legally, we could take you to court for not doing that. If you have damaged that building, it has to be handed back in the same or better condition than they took it on.
Curtis.
Thank you. I was going to raise the same point as well. But I do have, it's more of a drafting amendment, drafting comment, and it is under the closed section, so I'm not sure what you want to do. Is paragraph 8.1 of Appendix 3. It's just regarding the governance structure of the council, that I think probably needs updating from previous years. But, yeah.
You're being somewhat cryptic. No. Are you happy that if that amendment is made in the appendix to bring it up to date, you can...
Yeah, sorry for being a trouble causer.
This committee is full of devils today. Okay. Questions from members? Okay. Thank you for your report. I think this is one example where actually delaying decisions to allow for people to get together and talk things through has worked very well. It sounds to me, unless you tell me otherwise, the cricket club are happy with what they've got.
Yeah, I've spoken to them about all the terms and they are happy with that.
Users of the Graves Park will be able to access the pitch when they want, apart from on match days, which would be good. So it sounds as if it's a very positive outcome. So with that in mind, the recommendations are to note the contents of this report and approve the lease and licence proposals based on the terms set out in the closed Appendix 2. Is that in agreement? Yep, thank you very much. Thank you. Item 12 is the Phillimore Community Primary School proposal for Phillimore Park. I understand the presenting officers would be Kate and, sorry, I can't see you. Gareth, thank you, Gareth.
Yeah, Gareth, Kate Clark, Service Manager in the Sport and Leisure team, and Gareth is my colleague, Project Officer in the Sport and Leisure team, who's been working with me on the report. This report basically outlines a proposal from Phillimore Community Park Primary School to lease the pitch area in Phillimore Park, which is a charitable park. The recommendations of the report are to note the contents of the report, to agree to consider the proposal and request from the school, to authorise officers to take necessary steps to establish if the proposal is possible in the charity's best interest to dispose of the land requested, and to authorise officers to explore the legal requirement to acquire land from Sheffield City Council in exchange for the disposal. And if the Charities Subcommittee is happy to consider the proposals, a further report incorporating a designated advisor report will be brought back to the Charities Commission for a final decision. So this is the kind of first step in that process. So just in terms of a bit of background, Phillimore Park is a charitable park that's held in trust for use as purposes of public recreation. Sheffield City Council is the sole trustee of the charity. Phillimore Community Park Primary School have requested to lease the pitch area of the park, which is around 1.8 acres of the park, and that's adjacent to the school, and that's to provide safe outdoor green space for pupils to use for sport and physical activity, for outdoor learning and curriculum enrichment. And the pitch is protected under Sheffield Playing Pitch Strategy and must remain as a pitch. So as part of that proposal, Phillimore Community Primary School would manage club access to the pitch outside of school hours through a community use agreement. In terms of the proposal, the charitable objectives of the park require it to be used, as I said, for public recreation, which requires reasonable public access. Because the proposal to lease the pitch would grant a legal title and reserve access to the school and specific community groups to access the pitch, it does not meet the charitable objectives of the park. In order to address this, there's a possibility to exchange land to be leased with another green space in the local area. Any land for exchange would need to be of equivalent size and amenity value and of the same and or better quality. It's also important to say that this isn't the whole of Phillimore Park. There's also a kind of large area of Phillimore Park that would still remain in access to the public, which includes kind of play facilities, ball court, wooded area and kind of additional open space area. We did carry out some local consultation and have your say a citywide have your say survey late 2023, early 2024. That was, as well as an online survey, various drop-in events, conversations with the local community, consultation in the local school, attendance at East LAC meeting, and also a community drop-in. The majority of responses to that consultation were in favour of the proposal for the school to fence the pitch area to provide safe use for their pupils within the school day. There were a small number of objections, mainly around access for dog walking and access to that space for informal usage, and ensuring that when the fence was erected around the pitch, the surrounding pathways were still welcoming and safe for the community to use. We have, within the report, identified a potential alternative green space for exchange in the local area. There are already a number of charitable spaces within Darnall. Darnall Neighbourhood Park is one space that's close, within around 300 metres of Phillimore Park, that may be possible to exchange. Because Sheffield City Council is both the trustee of the charity and also the owner of the land for exchange, that legally makes us a connected party, which means an independent designator's advisor report would be required to assess the site and the land for exchange and provide further detail on that. In terms of the objects of the charity, obviously that land exchange would ensure the charity maintains its land's assets and continues to provide land for the purposes of public recreation, but that designated advisor's report will provide that kind of additional independent assessment of that. So as kind of detailed in the recommendations, we are looking for authority to kind of basically progress the investigation into this proposal further and obtain that designated advisor's report, at which point we'll come back to Charities Trustee Subcommittee and that report will enable you to make the decision as to whether this proposal is within the best interests of the charity.
Thank you.
I would only add that at 1.3 in the report there is a diagram, if you haven't seen it, that shows the boundary of the whole park in relation to the school and to the playing pitch as well, which is really helpful to get that context of what we're talking about.
Thank you. Just for absolute clarity, what you're asking today is authority to progress with your investigations. You're not asking for actual land transfers and things like that. Okay, thank you. On that basis, proceed.
Thank you. Again, this is just a speculative question. And I know that when you're exchanging land, it has to be the same size and the same quality. But if you identify land of a slightly less quality, can you take more of that land to balance it out, or does it not work like that?
Sorry, I was going to say that the option to uplift the quality does apply. So if it's a lesser quality, you can do work on it to bring it up to the quality, because it has to be of the same quality or higher.
Yeah. So if you couldn't do that, could you take a little bit more, and would that be the same, or is that?
I think that would have to go to the Charity Commission.
Yeah, we'd have to ask that question, I think. I think what we'd put within the report was that if the land wasn't of the equivalent quality, we'd probably look to invest in that land to bring it up to a similar quality. We've certainly looked at Sheffield standard scores across both of those sites, and Darnall Neighbourhood Park is slightly lower than Phillimore Park. I mean, there is, within those reports, kind of identified areas of potential things that we could do to improve that site. So that's something we have looked at. If that wasn't possible, we would need to ask the question, I think, of the Charities Commission and legal colleagues, just to see whether that was an alternative to kind of have a larger area.
Actually, by default, the larger area may increase the score by default, because if you've got a larger open space that could be used, for instance, yeah. But we definitely need to explore it and then take that to the Charities Commission for approval.
Yeah, I'm just quite keen on the or better rather than the equal to. Okay, Fran, you asked the question.
Yes, I had a similar question about uplifting the piece of land we're exchanging, but I think you've answered that. Just quickly, the key thing for me on this is the response of local people, basically, to the decision. And I know you have done, and I've talked to the councillors out there who feel this is something that's supported. However, where you do break down the figures on pages 134 and 135, you kind of break down who responded, and then you tell us the answer to the question about would you support a fence going round. You don't actually ask about the exchange of land, or we can't see it in what's in the report. And I just wondered did you ask that question in the consultation, and what was the response?
We didn't ask the question about exchanging the charitable land. No, what we did the consultation around was the proposal from the school, so we could understand whether local people were happy with potentially having an area of the park that was fenced off and not accessible kind of during the school day. I think the majority, and we had obviously the graphs there are from the online survey, but we also had quite a lot of consultation with kind of groups as well, and broadly that was positive, but no, the kind of exchange of the land wasn't discussed within that consultation.
If committee approves us to continue the work, then that is certainly something that we can ask when we get to a position where we want to come back with a further proposal. So yeah, we just asked about the proposal from the school, but then if we get to a position where we come into committee to ask trustees to dispose of the land and replace it with a betterment, then we could certainly ask that question of the community.
If there's no other questions, then I will go to the recommendations. So bear with me, there's a few here. The Charity Trustee SubCommittee is recommended to 1. Note the contents of the report, 2. Agree to consider this proposal and request from Phillimore Community Primary School, the school, to take a lease of a football pitch in Phillimore Park Charity. 3. Authorise officers to take all necessary steps to establish if it is possible and in the charity's best interests to proceed with the disposing of the land required by the school to Sheffield City Council. 4. Authorise officers to explore the legal requirements to acquire other land from Sheffield City Council in exchange for the disposal and to identify such land. And 5, and finally, note that if consideration of the proposal is approved by the committee, a further report incorporating a designated advisory report will be brought to the Charity Trustee SubCommittee for a decision as to whether to proceed with the exchange of land with Sheffield City Council. Do we have agreement? Yep, that's unanimous. Thank you. Thank you for your report. Right. The next three items might look quite similar, but they are specifically three separate items because each of these charities are individual bodies in their own right. The first one is Encliffe Park Ice Cream Operator Licence 2025. Would you like to introduce yourself, Dave? Take us through it.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Dave Rice. I'm the business manager in
Sorry, Dave.
Can I just say, Chair, that I will want to talk about something that's in the confidential section, so I'm wondering how you want to deal with that.
Will it cover all three of them?
Yes, it will cover all three of them, that's why I'm raising it now. So I wonder whether you wanted to take the next item and then do this at the end, or I know this is messing you around, but I will want to mention something.
So item 16, tenancy at will for Tinsley Park Golf Course.
And then anybody else could leave and we could discuss. I'm just suggesting it's up to you.
Okay, I'm quite happy to do that. Are the other members happy to do that? Sorry, Dave. So could I ask Joe Holland to come forward? This is item 16, which is a tenancy at will for the part of Tinsley Golf Course located within High Hazel's Park Charity. Would you just like to introduce yourself, please, and start when you like?
Yep, Joanne Holland, Programme Lead for the Leisure Investment Review Delivery Programme.
Who's not signed in yet?
Yeah.
She's just signing in, if you just give her a second.
Yeah, I'm in.
Else we've caused here.
So, in summary, the report today, it's following the outcome of the Council's Leisure Facility Investment Review Programme. We now have the preferred operator for the leisure venues, which is Everyone Active. One of the venues, which is Tinsley Golf, partly sits within the High Hazel's Park Charity, which was registered in 2018. This report is seeking approval for an interim tenancy at will to ensure continuation of the golf facilities when the current arrangements with the City Trust contractually end on the 31st of December. Terms of the tenancy at will are in a closed appendix, Appendix 2. There's an Appendix 1, which is the plan as well. Long term, the commercial arrangements will include granting of leases to Everyone Active for each venue, and these are currently being drafted. Details of the proposed lease terms will be addressed in a further report that will be brought to committee for a decision, but no date has been set yet. Both the proposed tenancy at will and lease will contribute to the charity objectives, for example, provide facilities for recreation, leisure time, socialising and playing sport. It gives comfort that the proposals also align with the trust deed too. So the recommendations are to note the contents of this report, agree that the charity enter into a tenancy at will with the provider on the terms set out in the appendix of this report, and note that a further report will be brought back to committee to seek the necessary approvals for a leasehold disposal once they've been negotiated.
Thank you very much. Does any member have questions on this? No, in that case I shall go to the recommendation, which is that the subcommittee notes the contents of this report, agree that the charity enter into a tenancy at will with the provider on the terms as set out in the appendix of this report, and note that a further report will be brought back to the committee to seek necessary approvals for the leasehold disposal once these have been negotiated. Is that agreed? That's agreed unanimously. Thank you. Thank you very much. Right, we shall now go back to item 13, which is the Encliffe Park Ice Cream Operators Licence 2025. At the moment, we're in open session. At what point you want to ask your questions, we will obviously have to restrict the access. Yeah, what we'll do, as advised, we'll deal with the public parts of all three first, and then we will go into the closed session for each of them in turn. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I'm David Rice, I'm the business manager in Parks and Countryside. The body of all the three reports are very similar. The financial detail, the commercially sensitive parts are the only difference, really. So there are three reports for Weston Park, Encliffe Park and Graves Park. Each requires a separate decision. All the ice cream operators on those three sites run out before the spring. Previously, there've been 3-year agreements, but back in September's meeting, a decision was reached to allow longer licences for up to 7 years. That would allow operators more sustainability, more confidence, and a chance to recoup any investment made. So we went for tender. The tenders have been received, reviewed. All the details, all the sensitive details are in the reports, and we look for a decision for each site to approve the report's recommendations as the most beneficial for the charities.
Does anybody have any queries about Encliffe Park?
I just have a comment that applies to all of the parks, because I know we are talking about agreeing to operators that will move towards an electric vehicle in a couple of years. So we've got an agreement that that will happen. I'm just curious as to what will happen until then. I'm really worried. And you know, one of the reasons we're asking about this is these are in parks where there are a lot of children, and we don't want diesel fumes for young lungs to get damaged by. So are we making sure that the operators that aren't electric yet are not going to run their engines while they are in the parks? Because I know we don't allow buses to idle outside schools, so I'm hoping that we will make sure that engines are not idling in parks where children are, and I'm hoping that we've considered that when we've accepted our bids.
I'll start if that's okay. So just to be clear, we haven't accepted any bids. That's exactly what we're asking you to approve here. I think it's important to say that the operators are being asked to move to an electric vehicle within 2 years. And the reason that I say that is that we're giving them till the end of the second year of the licence to have converted. The reason we're doing that is because currently there's about a 12-month lead-in on new electric vehicles. But we had to wait for this meeting for it to be approved, so that 12 months could turn into 14 months or 18 months, and we wanted to give them time to order the vehicles, which the operators that we spoke to were all happy to do so once it was confirmed, and then they would be expected to be using that electric vehicle on those sites within that 2-year period, and if we went into the 3rd year without them using it, that would be them breaching their licence, so they would no longer be able to operate. In the interest of transparency, up until the point that they use that electric vehicle, the arrangements would be as they are now, which does include the use of diesel engines, because that is currently how, I believe, these operators, certainly the operators that we've got on site at the moment, those that are still operating in this winter wet period, do keep their ice cream cool. So I think it's important to say that that wouldn't change up until that, up until the point they had that new vehicle delivered.
Yeah. I understand that, but I think there's a question about whether their operating procedures require them to keep the engine running and idling in a park, or whether they have a production method that doesn't involve that, because we don't really want idling engines in parks.
At this moment in time, it's the diesel engine that keeps the stock refrigerated. That's what we're aiming to move away from.
So yes, there will be. Apologies, I didn't have my mic on. Just to be really clear, the diesel engines are Euro
Euro
6
6
compliant, so they're as sustainable as they can be, but they will be idling with the engines running to power the generators to keep the freezers to store their produce until they're electrified within 2 years.
Have the operators indicated potentially how quickly they can transfer across?
There are full details in the report. Some operators have already ordered the new vans. Some are waiting for the outcome of today's decision, which is why, if you see in the report, there are slight different timescales.
Do you know which ones?
Okay, any other questions from members? In that case, I assume that we'll go to 14, which is Graves Park. We're going to do the closed sessions all at the end, I believe. Yeah.
So, yeah, sorry, just for clarity, in terms of what's happening, we haven't taken a vote on any of these items. I think the plan is that we are actually technically on 13, but what we're going to do is invite the officer to talk to 14 and 15 as well, in terms of the public content. Then we'll move into closed session for the discussion, and then we'll sequentially take the votes on 13, 14 and 15.
Back in open session.
Back in open session, thank you. I'm Robert Parkin from the Legal Services team. Didn't introduce.
Okay, thank you. So for completeness, again, the licence runs out spring of 2025. We need an operator from that point. Back in September, we agreed to go to the market for a 7-year term, not the previous 3-year term. Tenders are in, received, reviewed, and we look for a decision to approve the recommendations as being the most beneficial to the charity.
Any particular questions specific to Graves? No. Concerns are similar. Okay, then, if I've got this right, we should then do 15, which is Weston Park. Just for completeness, Dave.
Okay, thanks. Weston Park also runs out before next summer, runs out springtime. That was a 3-year licence. We're now looking at a 7-year licence to allow investment. Tenders are received and reviewed, full details in the report. We seek a decision to approve the report as being the most beneficial for the charity.
Thank you. Just for completeness again, does any members have any specific questions regarding the open session for Weston Park? No. In that case, with your permission, I would like to go into private session and exclude the public and the press for this time to consider that these three again. We will come back to open session for a vote for each of them in turn. So if we could turn the cameras off, please. This is item 13, Endcliffe Park, ice cream operator licence for 2025. The recommendations for this subcommittee are as follows. 1, to note the contents of the report. 2, approve the grant of a 7-year licence to the selected operator for ice cream provision in Endcliffe Park with the condition that an e-power zero emissions vehicle is used by the end of the 2nd year of the licence period. And thirdly, that delegate authority to property services and parks and countryside to issue the licence on the terms proposed. Is that agreed? Yep, that's unanimous. Is the wording for the recommendations the same for all 3 papers? No. So I don't have to dig around. Okay. Item 14 is Graves Park, ice cream operator licence 2025. Recommendations that the charity subcommittee is recommended to note the contents of this report, approve the grant of a 7-year licence to the selected operator for ice cream provision in Graves Park with a condition that an e-power zero emission vehicle is used by the end of year 2 of the licence period. And thirdly, to delegate authority to property services and parks and countryside to issue a licence on the terms proposed. Is that agreed? Okay, that's agreed unanimously. And item 15 is Western Park Ice Cream Operator Licence 2025. The Charity Subcommittee is recommended to note the contents of the report, approve the grant of a 7-year licence to the selected operator for ice cream provision in Western Park, with the condition that the e-Power zero-emission vehicle is used by the end of year 2 of the licence period. And thirdly, delegate authority to Property Services and Parks and Countryside to issue the licence on the terms proposed. Is that agreed? Right, that's agreed unanimously. And I believe, unless I've got this wrong, that concludes our business today. Thank you very much.